first I want to just apologize for being in a car while I'm doing this. We are on our way to move to Florida this weekend, so we've been in the car for 3 days. So the only time that I have daylight is when we're driving. So anyway, so our back seat's really full. Alright, so in chapters 5 and 6, there's a lot that I learned about myself, or maybe not so much learned, but just connections that I made of how I use power and leadership and how I respond to conflict in different scenarios very differently. So for the self-assessment 5.1, where we're talking about what power forms we use most, I realized that like with parenting, I am high reward. So I want my kids to feel, especially at their age right now, being almost 3 and 7, that they have more control, but that they're able to be rewarded for right choices that they make. But then coercive, I scored like extremely as low as you could on that. I really don't like coercive power being used on me, and I really don't like using it on other people. And then legitimate power, I've had jobs where I have legitimate power. I mean, all my jobs have had that, but I don't appreciate using that because it feels like someone's not really doing what they truly want to do, so I'm not going to get the best out of them unless they're doing it because they want to. And so when I enforce legitimate power on them, I feel like I'm just not getting the best results that I could get, so I try not to use that power even if I have it. So referent power, I scored as high as you could score, so 5s, all 5s on that category. And I think that this is really important to me to feel like, not to feel like I'm likable, not because I want everyone to like me necessarily, but like I said before, I just think that I get the most out of people when they're working for a vision that they feel passionate about, or they're following a leader because they feel like their leader is capable and taking them someplace that they want to go, and that they're along for the journey. So in my role as a kids pastor at Eaglebrook, I used this almost all of the time because it was a volunteer culture where I was in charge of 900 volunteers, and so I couldn't, although I had legitimate power over them, I couldn't really I wasn't paying them. The rewards were all intrinsic rewards. So I really needed to rely upon my likability and their respect for me in order to make sure that we got things done. And then expert power, in my latest job as a community pastor, I think I relied on that more because I had a much smaller base of volunteers, and I was hired in the position because I knew more about it and no one else on staff had experience in that role before. So they felt ill-equipped, I felt very equipped, and so there was a lot of answering questions, a lot of sharing my thoughts. So I relied a lot on that expert power level. So, and I scored high on that too. So reward, referent, and expert were the 3 areas that I scored high on, and I think that I agree with that assessment pretty well. Then for assessment 5.2, we were talking about our different abilities in leadership. And so there was our political skill inventory. There was networking ability, interpersonal influence, social astuteness, and apparent sincerity. And so networking, I scored very low on, and I thought that was funny because I definitely know this about myself. I don't enjoy networking. I like getting to know people, but I don't like getting to know people for a purpose where it feels like I'm having to get something out of them. That does feel very political to me. So when Johnson was talking about that in his book, I resonated with that a lot. So I've actually had, in all my roles, had to partner with people that I knew were great networkers. It just came naturally to them, so then it seemed a lot more authentic, and I didn't feel like I was having to manipulate other people. It felt like I could use someone else in a good way to make connections that they just naturally already made, and then use their power, their equity that they had in relationships in order to get things done. And that made me feel a lot more comfortable. And then interpersonal influence, I scored really high on that, and social astuteness and apparent sincerity. And I think that all speaks to how referent leadership is my highest level, because I want people to want to do what they're doing. And so I am an very like interpersonal person, and my influence skills are very high. And then I'm able to like read a situation or read people and see what they're really needing in that spot that they're in. And I think because I'm actually passionate about this, I come across as very sincere, because I am sincere. So I, again, thought that was all stuff that I knew about myself, but it was just interesting to see it broken up that way, and reaffirmed that I definitely need to partner with people who are networkers. And it's funny, my husband is like Mr. Networking. He loves networking. And we partner well with that, even though sometimes it feels very scary for me, because I feel like, oh, what if I get drawn in? And I become uncomfortable, or like I'm put on the spot. But to see how like easy that is for him, and so for him, I bet his sincerity score is really high as well, even though for me to try to do that would feel insincere. So that's something that I need to work on. And then in self-assessment 6.1, we were talking about conflict style inventories. So avoidance and competition were my lowest, but I think I reflected a little bit on this in our post. Competition, I think, unfortunately, I use that in my own marriage, because sometimes we feel like we're at war with who knows more. And so instead of it being more of a collaborative environment, it's more of a competitive environment, which is really unhealthy and something that we're working on. But that showed in my scores, that every question that I was answering that was higher in that's what I was thinking of, was like, well, I do this sometimes here or there. And then compromise was kind of middle of the ground. I had a score of 16 for that, and accommodation was 20 and collaboration was 21. So I really enjoy collaboration. I think that normally that's where I'm most comfortable. I think that I beget an environment of collaboration because I'm always wanting other people's opinions and their full buy-in. So I want to listen and hear, and I don't think that I show up and know everything. In fact, I really enjoy putting people around me that know a lot more about certain things than I know, because I just feel like we're going to come to a better conclusion then. So collaboration is definitely my best wheelhouse, but accommodation, I realized that, that was a very high score as well. And I think I do that in any situation or scenario where I honestly don't care. Like it doesn't bother me. I feel indifferent about what conclusion we're going to come to, and so then I just automatically would rather accommodate and not put any emotional energy into sharing what I think about it or how I feel, because I know that there's other areas that I'm really passionate about. And so I want other people to I want to leverage that what's the word I'm looking for? I want to just leverage the power that I have when it really, really matters to me. And then when it doesn't matter to me, I want people to know, like, I'm fully accommodating, I'm supportive, we can do it however you'd like it in whatever way you think is best. And compromise, I think, shows up in work and in marriage when we're just at an impasse and I can't, there's not a way that I can figure out where both parties win. And I know that he talked a little bit about, win-win versus like I lose or zero-sum game. So that's something else that I'm working on, is how can I see compromise as more like, hey, I get something that I want, you get something that you want, and we are settled there. For me, it feels like whenever I'm going to share my opinion, I've really thought through it, and I feel very passionate about it. So I'd rather collaborate. So if I'm met with someone that I feel like goes against what I think, and I'm having to compromise, it feels like a loss for me. So I'm trying to reframe my own self in that area. In self-assessment 6.2, we're talking about bullying in the workplace. And as I was going through this, I scored really low, which is great. But I actually think that I was surprised at how low the score was, because I think that my past work environment was pretty high in dysfunction in this area. But as I was reflecting on it, I was seeing that I have the luxury of not needing to work, and I think that changes my mentality when I go into work, because instead of having to be subject to something that, like any action that I don't like, I carry myself in a way of like, I'm not going to put up with poor behavior or people mistreating one another. And so I'm going to stand up for anyone else that I think has been subject to that, which I do right away. Like I don't feel like I need to wait and adapt to the culture of a place before standing up to something that I feel is wrong. And I don't really feel like there's enough on the line for me to not do that, because the worst that could happen is like you don't like me and you fire me, and if I'm being fired or kind of pushed out or have negative consequences over something that I feel is moral, I don't have any problem with that at all, and I can financially do that. So I think that that's why maybe I scored lower on this, is because I'm not always subject to bullying or subject to being gossiped about, or being abused, or taking on like having to have too much work on my plate. I'm not as subject to that because I think that I'm better at setting those boundaries in a workplace. But in my last workplace, I feel like most of the people were very subject to that, and so that is hard for me, and that's one of the reasons that led me to quit and to resign at that time. So I really enjoyed chapter 5 and chapter 6. Thanks for bearing with me while I'm in my car doing the self-assessment video, and I'm really enjoying this course so far. Thanks. Bye.